The first deputy stepped out of the cruiser just as a little girl in a yellow jacket ran toward the front porch of Greyhaven Lodge, carrying a stuffed bear almost as big as she was. Behind her, two SUVs sat idling in the gravel lot, their trunks open, vacation luggage stacked everywhere, while the smell of pine and cold mountain air drifted through the fading North Carolina sunset. Standing at the lodge entrance was Priscilla Vane, smiling like she owned the place, holding a tablet in one hand and a ring of keys in the other as she welcomed paying guests to what she called the finest mountain rental retreat in the county. Then she saw me. Everything changed. "Sir, guests are checking in," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You need to leave the property immediately." A few people turned toward me. I was wearing an old flannel jacket, dusty work boots, and driving a 15-year-old pickup truck. To them, I probably looked like some stubborn local causing trouble. That was exactly what Priscilla wanted. 3 families stood frozen beside their luggage while she walked down the porch steps and pointed toward the road. Her smile never moved. "You've already been warned," she said. "This lodge is under community management." I looked past her at the massive timber building rising against the mountainside. Fresh lights glowed through windows that had been dark for more than a decade. Smoke curled from the stone chimney. Somebody had even hung flower baskets beside the front entrance. It would have been beautiful if it wasn't stolen. Big mistake. One deputy approached carefully while the other remained near the cruiser. Neither looked excited to be there. The older deputy cleared his throat. "Sir, we received a call about a disturbance." Priscilla folded her arms and nodded dramatically. "He keeps claiming he owns the lodge." Several guests exchanged uncomfortable looks. One man slowly lowered his suitcase back onto the gravel. His wife glanced at me, then at the deputies, clearly wondering why the owner of a luxury vacation rental looked ready to be removed by law enforcement. I reached into my truck and pulled out a thin brown folder. Nothing fancy. No speeches. No shouting. Just paperwork. Priscilla actually laughed when she saw it. "Not this again." That laugh told me everything. She thought the game was over. She thought the deputies were here for me. She thought the check-in weekend she'd spent months advertising was finally going to make her look like a mountain hospitality genius. She had no idea she was standing in the middle of her worst mistake. The little girl with the stuffed bear stopped beside her father and looked up at the deputies. Even the wind seemed to go quiet. I handed the folder to the older deputy and said the only sentence I'd spoken all evening. "Before anyone carries another bag through that front door, you may want to check who signed the deed." Silence. The deputy opened the folder. Priscilla's smile faded just a little. Not much. Just enough. And that tiny change told me she was starting to feel something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Uncertainty. What happened next would shut down more than a fake Airbnb listing. It would expose months of lies, thousands of dollars collected from strangers, and a scheme that depended on one thing staying hidden forever: ownership. Let me back up and show you how a $7.2 million abandoned mountain lodge became the center of the biggest HOA nightmare I've ever seen. And while I do, I'd love to know where you're watching from tonight. One thing I've learned is that every town in America seems to have at least one person who mistakes confidence for authority. The stories people share always remind me we're not dealing with different problems, just different zip codes. 7 months earlier, none of this looked like a fight. It looked like a promise. I was 68 years old, retired after 4 decades as a commercial property appraiser, and for the first time in my life, I had nowhere important to be on a Monday morning. The phone was quiet. The calendar was empty. The house felt too large. That was the hardest part. 3 years had passed since my wife Elaine died, but grief has a strange way of hiding in ordinary places. It waits in empty chairs. Elaine loved mountains. She loved old buildings even more. Every October we would drive through western North Carolina looking at forgotten inns, abandoned cabins, and historic lodges tucked between ridges covered in red and gold leaves. She always said old places deserve second chances. I never forgot that. One rainy afternoon, I was scrolling through foreclosure listings when a familiar photograph stopped me cold. There it was. The old mountain lodge we used to visit from the highway overlook. The same stone chimney. The same timber frame. The same wraparound porch overlooking miles of forest. Only now the windows were boarded up and weeds covered half the parking lot. The place had been empty for 11 years. Still beautiful. I drove out the next morning. The road twisted through the mountains for nearly an hour before the trees opened and the building appeared. Even neglected, it had a presence. The kind of place that makes you slow down without realizing it. The wind pushed through the pines. A loose shutter tapped softly against the wall. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out over the valley. I just stood there. Then I smiled. For the first time in a while. The property covered nearly 30 acres. There was a creek running behind the lodge, an old picnic area, several hiking trails, and enough room for future renovations if I ever decided to reopen it. The asking price looked intimidating to most people, but years of appraising commercial real estate had taught me how to separate emotion from numbers. I checked everything. Tax records, ownership history, easements, liens, environmental reports, title records, every document I could legally obtain. That mattered. People get into trouble when they assume ownership instead of proving it. I had seen multi-million-dollar lawsuits start because someone trusted a rumor more than a deed. The deeper I dug, the cleaner the property looked. No hidden claims. No disputed boundaries. No active management contracts. No legal surprises waiting underground. That was rare. Very rare. A month later, the sale closed. The wire transfer cleared. The county recorded the deed. The title company issued insurance. On paper and in reality, the property belonged to me. Completely. I remember carrying a folding chair onto the porch during my first evening there. The sunset painted the mountains orange and gold while cool air drifted through the valley. I sat there with a cup of coffee and looked at the empty building. Most people saw a rundown investment. I saw Elaine smiling and telling me not to leave it forgotten. That was enough. The next few weeks were spent planning repairs, meeting contractors, and creating a realistic budget. Nothing flashy, just practical work. Fix the roof, restore the windows, upgrade the electrical system, bring the old place back slowly and correctly. Then something strange started happening. Small things at first. A fresh tire track in the gravel lot. A recently emptied trash can near the side entrance. New footprints around the porch after rain. Somebody was using the property. Somebody who definitely did not own it. At first, I assumed it was hikers or curious locals. Then one Thursday morning, I found something taped to the front door. A printed welcome packet. Not mine. Not even close. And the name signed at the bottom would become a very big problem. The packet was printed on expensive paper. It had a mountain logo across the top, a welcome message for arriving guests, wireless internet instructions, checkout rules, emergency contact numbers, and a section titled Laurel Crest Hospitality Services. At the very bottom was a signature. Priscilla Vane. I read it twice just to make sure. Then I looked around the empty lodge again. Somebody had spent real money creating this. Somebody expected people to arrive. That was new. The next morning I drove into town and stopped at a diner that had been there longer than I had. Places like that are better than social media if you want the truth. The coffee is hot, the gossip is free, and everybody knows something. I carried the packet inside and slid into a booth near the window. 10 minutes later I had my answer. Maybe 3 answers. None of them were good. One retired electrician recognized the logo immediately. A waitress recognized the name. A contractor recognized the lodge. That got my attention. Fast. You bought that old place? The electrician asked. Then you are? Probably going to meet Priscilla sooner or later. The contractor laughed into his coffee. More likely sooner. Nobody smiled after that. They started telling stories. Priscilla Vane had moved into Laurel Crest about 4 years earlier. She arrived from Charlotte with money, confidence, and a habit of speaking like she was already in charge. Within 12 months, she was on the HOA board. Within 18 months, she was running it. Within 2 years, most people had stopped arguing with her. Not because she was right, because she was exhausting. She had a talent for turning every disagreement into a committee meeting. Every committee meeting into a policy. Every policy into a rule. Then every rule into a business opportunity. That pattern mattered. One contractor leaned closer. She keeps talking about turning this area into a destination. Another shook his head. She acts like she owns half the mountain. Then the waitress dropped the biggest clue of all. I thought she already owned that lodge. I looked up. Why? Because she rents it out. Silence. For a second I thought I had misheard her. Then she pulled out her phone. 3 taps later, she turned the screen toward me. There it was. A full rental listing. Professional photographs. Online booking calendar. Weekend rates. Cleaning fees. Holiday packages. Mountain retreat marketing. The pictures showed my building, my porch, my property, my lodge. My name was nowhere on it. That was impossible. Yet there it was. I spent the rest of the afternoon digging. Years in commercial real estate taught me one simple lesson. When something feels wrong, follow the paperwork. I searched vacation rental sites. I checked archived listings. I compared photographs. I read reviews. The deeper I looked, the stranger it became. Guests had been staying there for months. Families from Georgia, retirees from Florida, couples celebrating anniversaries. People were paying thousands of dollars to stay in a property that did not belong to the person collecting the money. That should not happen. Yet it was happening. The reviews were almost funny if they had not involved my property. Guests praised the mountain views, praised the giant fireplace, praised the privacy. Several even thanked Laurel Crest Hospitality Management for the experience. One review mentioned seeing a woman named Priscilla personally handling check-in. Another praised her professionalism. A third described her as the owner. Owner. That word sat in my head all night. The next morning I drove back to the lodge earlier than usual. Fog rolled through the trees and covered the valley like a blanket. The parking lot was empty. The building stood quiet. Then I noticed something I had somehow missed before. Near the side entrance, hidden behind a row of shrubs, was a brand new lockbox mounted beside the door. I walked over slowly. Attached to it was a small metal plaque. The plaque read, Guest Access. Property managed by Laurel Crest Hospitality Services. I stared at it for several seconds. Then I smiled. Not because I was happy, because I finally understood something important. This was not confusion. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a paperwork mistake. Somebody had built an entire business around property they did not own. And for the first time, I was beginning to understand just how far Priscilla Vane was willing to go. The next Saturday, I decided it was time to stop guessing and start introducing myself. The booking calendar showed a guest arrival scheduled for noon, and if somebody was running a business on my property, sooner or later they would have to show up in person. I parked my truck behind a line of trees overlooking the lodge and waited. The mountain air was cool. Clouds drifted slowly over the ridges. Birds moved through the pines while the old building sat quietly beneath the morning sun. Then a black luxury sport utility vehicle rolled into the parking lot. Right on schedule. A woman stepped out wearing expensive hiking boots that had clearly never touched a hiking trail, oversized sunglasses, and a cream-colored jacket that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. She carried a tablet under one arm and a stainless steel coffee tumbler in the other. She walked toward the front porch like she owned every board in the place. I already knew who she was. Priscilla Vane. Seeing her in person somehow explained everything. Confidence radiated off her like heat from asphalt in July. She checked her tablet, unlocked the front door with a key, and disappeared inside. Not a spare key. Not an emergency key. A working key. My key. That got my attention. 20 minutes later, a family arrived in a rented SUV loaded with coolers and hiking gear. 2 parents. 2 kids. A golden retriever hanging its head out the back window. They looked excited. They looked happy. They looked like people who had absolutely no idea they had just driven into a legal disaster. Priscilla greeted them with a smile. She handed them paperwork. She pointed toward the lodge. She acted exactly like a professional property manager. Then I started walking toward them. Slowly. Calmly. The father noticed me first. He gave a polite wave. I waved back. Priscilla saw me a second later. Her smile disappeared immediately. Can I help you? She asked. I stopped a few feet away. Actually, I think I can help you. Her expression hardened. This is a private guest check-in. I know, I said. That is why I am here. The family looked back and forth between us. Nobody understood what was happening yet. Priscilla folded her arms. Sir, if you are not a registered guest, you need to leave. I almost laughed. Instead, I pointed at the building behind her. I bought this property 2 months ago. The silence that followed was almost impressive. The father blinked. The mother lowered her sunglasses. Even the kids stopped talking. Priscilla recovered quickly. Too quickly. No, you did not. Yes, I said. I did. This property is under community management. According to who? She took one step closer. According to Laurel Crest Hospitality Services. There it was. Not a deed. Not a title record. Not a county document. Just the name of the company she created. I had spent 40 years evaluating commercial real estate deals. People who have the truth usually show paperwork. People who do not have the truth usually show confidence. Big difference. Do you have ownership documents? I asked. Her jaw tightened. I do not need to show you anything. Actually, I said, that is interesting because I can show you mine. For a moment I thought she might back down. She did not. Instead she pulled out her phone. I am calling the sheriff. The family looked nervous now. The father shifted his weight and quietly asked, Is there a problem with the rental? Priscilla answered before I could. No problem at all. Then she pointed directly at me. This man has been harassing guests for weeks. That was a lie. My first direct lie from her. And it would not be the last. 25 minutes later a deputy arrived. I explained the situation. Priscilla explained hers. The deputy listened carefully, looked uncomfortable, and finally said something that frustrated me more than I expected. This sounds like a civil property dispute. Then he asked me to leave while ownership records could be verified. Priscilla smiled as if she had won. The guests carried their luggage inside. The front door closed. The deputy drove away, and I stood alone in the parking lot watching strangers settle into my lodge. That was the moment I realized something important. Priscilla was not worried about being right. She was betting nobody would take the time to prove she was wrong. Most people think the worst part of a property dispute is losing access to something you own. They are wrong. The worst part is watching other people get pulled into the mess without even knowing it. Over the next 3 weeks, I started tracking every public listing I could find. The lodge appeared on multiple vacation rental platforms. The photographs were updated regularly. New reviews kept appearing. Weekend dates disappeared from the booking calendar almost as soon as they became available. Business was good. Too good. Every time I refreshed the listings, another family seemed to be planning a vacation at a property they believed was being rented legally. That bothered me more than I expected. One Tuesday morning I received an email from a woman named Carol Jensen. I had quietly added my contact information to a local property ownership database, and somehow she found me. Her message was simple. Are you connected to the lodge? We stayed there last month, and I have a question about a damage charge. That got my attention immediately. I called her that afternoon. Carol was a retired schoolteacher from Ohio. She and her husband had booked a 5-night stay to celebrate their 42nd wedding anniversary. They paid almost $4,000 after fees, taxes, cleaning costs, and what was described as a mountain preservation surcharge. She laughed when she said the name. Then she stopped laughing. We never understood what that fee was for. Neither did I. Carol explained that after checkout she received an additional charge for a damaged chair. The problem was they never used the chair. They had photographs. Time-stamped photographs. The chair was already damaged when they arrived. Yet somebody charged their credit card anyway. That was interesting. Very interesting. 2 days later I spoke with a veteran from Florida named Raymond Burke. He booked a family reunion at the lodge for 12 people. According to him, Priscilla personally handled the reservation. She promised private hiking access, exclusive amenities, and premium mountain services. None of those things existed. Raymond sounded embarrassed more than angry. I thought something fell off, he admitted. But the place was beautiful, so we ignored the warning signs. That sentence stayed with me. People ignore warning signs when they want something to be true. Priscilla understood that. She understood marketing. She understood appearances. Most importantly, she understood confidence. What she did not understand was documentation. I spent decades in commercial appraisal. Documents tell stories people try very hard to hide. The deeper I dug, the more stories I found. Guest reviews mentioned surprise fees. Guests mentioned deposits that took months to return. Several reviews praised Priscilla for helping them solve problems, which meant she was directly involved in daily operations. One review even thanked her for being such a hands-on owner. Owner. There was that word again. It kept showing up. Then I found something even stranger. A family from Georgia uploaded vacation photographs online. In the background of one picture, mounted beside the check-in desk, was a framed sign. The sign listed Laurel Crest Hospitality Services as the official management company of the property. Not temporary management. Not volunteer oversight. Official management. That sign should never have existed. Yet there it was hanging on my wall. The more evidence I collected, the bigger the situation became. This was no longer about me being locked out of my building. It was about guests paying real money based on representations that appeared increasingly questionable. It was about people making travel decisions using information they trusted. It was about a business operation built on assumptions nobody bothered to verify. One Friday afternoon, I drove through Laurel Crest itself. Perfect landscaping, Identical mailboxes. Decorative stone entrances. Everything looked polished and expensive. Then I noticed something that made me slow down. Near the clubhouse entrance stood a large promotional banner advertising seasonal mountain retreats. The banner featured a photograph of the lodge. My lodge. Beneath the picture were the words Experience Historic Greyhaven Luxury. Operated by Laurel Crest Hospitality Services. I sat in my truck staring at that banner for nearly a minute. Nobody was hiding anymore. Whatever started as unauthorized access had evolved into a full public operation. The boldness almost impressed me. Almost. Then I saw a group of homeowners walking into the clubhouse. Two of them stopped near the banner. One man pointed toward the photograph and quietly asked another resident something. The other resident shrugged. That moment told me something important. Not everyone in Laurel Crest knew what was happening. Some were probably being misled too, which meant the circle of potential victims was growing larger every week. And if that was true, then Priscilla's problem was becoming much bigger than a disagreement over property ownership. At that point, most people expected me to hire the biggest lawyer I could find and march straight into court. I did not. Years in real estate taught me something simple. The first person who gets angry usually loses information. The first person who stays calm usually gains it. So instead of making noise, I started collecting records. Every single one I could legally obtain. The following Monday, I drove to the county recorder's office carrying a notebook, a folder, and enough patience to last all day. The building looked exactly the same as it had 20 years earlier. Same beige walls. Same worn floors. Same smell of paper and coffee. Some places never change. That is not a bad thing. The clerk behind the counter recognized me from previous appraisal work. After a few minutes, she returned with certified copies of the recorded deed, ownership history, parcel maps, and transfer documents connected to the property. Everything matched exactly what I already knew. My ownership was clear. No competing deeds. No management agreements. No easements granting operational control. Nothing. Clean as a whistle. That mattered. Next came the tax office. The county assessor confirmed every property tax payment had been made. The foreclosure sale had been completed correctly. The transfer was finalized. There were no outstanding ownership disputes. Again, everything pointed in the same direction. I owned the property. Completely. Then I started following the business side. That was where things became interesting. Very interesting. Laurel Crest Hospitality Services sounded impressive. It sounded official. It sounded established. So I searched public business filings. The company existed. Barely. It had been registered less than a year earlier. The listed business address was not the lodge. It was the Laurel Crest Clubhouse. The registered manager was Priscilla Vane. No surprise there. What surprised me was what came next. The business description mentioned hospitality consulting and guest services. It said nothing about owning mountain resorts. Nothing about operating commercial lodging facilities. Nothing about managing my property. Yet somehow the company was advertising itself exactly that way. I made copies. Lots of copies. Every document went into a growing binder sitting on my dining room table. By now the binder was becoming thicker than some mortgage files I used to review. That is when my old instincts kicked in. Whenever a story stops making sense, look at the money. Money always leaves footprints. I started comparing booking calendars against public reviews. Then I compared review dates against photographs guests posted online. Then I matched those dates against social media advertisements promoting seasonal retreats. Patterns started appearing. Guests were checking in almost every weekend. Holiday rates were significantly higher than normal. Additional fees appeared everywhere. Cleaning fees, reservation fees, administrative fees, priority check-in fees, service fees, mountain access fees. The numbers added up quickly. Too quickly. One evening I sat at my kitchen table with a calculator and a yellow legal pad. Rain tapped softly against the windows while the coffee beside me went cold. After 3 hours of calculations, I leaned back in my chair and stared at the total. Based on publicly available information alone, the operation appeared to have generated well over $100,000 during the previous year. Maybe more. Much more. That was not a hobby. That was a business. The next clue arrived by accident. A contractor I knew called me after hearing rumors around town. He asked a simple question. Did you know somebody has been ordering repairs under the lodge's name? I nearly dropped the phone. What kind of repairs? He listed landscaping work, cleaning services, maintenance visits, and seasonal preparation. Nothing major. but enough to create paperwork. Enough to leave a trail. I asked if invoices existed. He laughed. Everything leaves invoices. Music to my ears. Over the next week, I quietly contacted several vendors. Some could not discuss details. Some would not discuss details. A few were surprisingly willing to talk. One cleaning company believed Priscilla represented ownership. Another landscaping crew said they were told Laurel Crest managed the property. Nobody mentioned seeing proof. They simply assumed the person giving instructions had authority. People do that every day. It is how problems grow. Then came the first real crack in the wall. A local handyman emailed me a copy of an unpaid invoice after learning I was the actual owner. The invoice was addressed to Laurel Crest Hospitality Services. Attached to it was a work order, requesting repairs for guest occupancy at the lodge. Guest occupancy. There it was in writing. Not rumor. Not conversation. Documentation. I read that invoice 3 times. Then I placed it inside the binder. By now the evidence was beginning to tell a very different story from the one Priscilla presented publicly. But the biggest surprise was still waiting for me. Because buried inside a routine business search was a filing connected to a newly created limited liability company. And the purpose of that company would explain exactly why Priscilla had become so bold. The filing looked ordinary at first. A few pages. Standard business language. Nothing dramatic. Then I reached the section describing the company's assets and future operations, and suddenly the entire picture snapped into focus. That was the moment everything changed. The newly formed limited liability company was not designed to manage weekend rentals. It was structured to attract investors. The filing referenced hospitality expansion opportunities, long-term revenue projections, and future development rights connected to mountain lodging operations. There was only one problem. The mountain lodging operation they were describing belonged to me, not them. I read every page twice. Then a third time. The more carefully I read, the worse it became. The company was presenting itself as if control of the lodge was already established. Future income estimates were included. Occupancy projections were included. Growth plans were included. Somebody was treating my property as a business asset without ever owning it. That was bold. Very bold. The next morning I called a former colleague named Randall Pierce. Randall had spent 30 years reviewing commercial transactions and knew how to read corporate filings better than almost anyone I had ever met. I emailed him copies and waited. 2 hours later my phone rang. "Warren," he said, "tell me this is not what I think it is." "What do you think it is?" There was a long pause. "I think somebody is trying to sell a future they do not control." That matched my instincts exactly. Randall explained that investors often focus on projected revenue and management. Authority. If somebody falsely presents control over a valuable asset, people can make decisions based on information that is not accurate. That was dangerous territory. Not because of what had happened already, because of what might happen next. I started monitoring public advertisements more closely. Within days I found another clue. An online hospitality conference scheduled for the following month listed Priscilla as a guest speaker during a regional tourism panel. Her biography described her as the managing operator of a historic mountain retreat property. I nearly laughed when I read it. Then I stopped laughing. Because she was not slowing down. She was accelerating. Every week the claims became larger. Every week the operation became more public. Every week more people seemed to accept the story without asking basic questions. That was the real lesson. Most people assume authority is legitimate when it sounds professional. Few stop and ask for proof. I decided it was time to create a record nobody could ignore. Through an attorney, I sent a formal cease and desist letter. The letter included proof of ownership, certified deed records, title documentation, and written notice that no authorization existed for commercial operations on the property. It was professional, direct, clear. There was no confusion. There was no ambiguity. There was no excuse. Then I waited. 7 days passed. Nothing. 10 days passed. Still nothing. 2 weeks later an answer finally arrived. Not from a lawyer. Not from a property manager. From Priscilla herself. The email contained exactly 3 sentences. Laurel Crest Hospitality Services maintains lawful operational authority. We reject your allegations. Future communications should be directed through proper channels. I stared at the screen for almost a minute. Then I smiled. Because she had just made a mistake. A very useful mistake. She responded personally. She acknowledged the dispute. She continued asserting authority after receiving documentation. Everything was now happening in writing. Documentation beats intimidation. Every time. Around that same period, I learned about something called the Autumn Heritage Weekend. It was being advertised as the largest event of the season. 12 guest groups. Full occupancy. Premium pricing. Special guided activities. Expanded hospitality services. According to promotional materials, it would be the most visible weekend the operation had ever hosted. Hundreds of online followers were expected to watch through live stream coverage and social media updates. Most people would have rushed to shut it down immediately. I did not. Instead, I called my attorney. Then I contacted the sheriff's office. Then I organized every document, photograph, email, invoice, business filing, review, advertisement, and ownership record into a single binder. Not because I wanted a fight, because I wanted facts. The sheriff's office reviewed the ownership documents carefully. My attorney prepared supporting records. The evidence binder continued growing. By the time Autumn Heritage Weekend approached, the stack of paperwork weighed almost as much as a toolbox. Meanwhile, Priscilla kept advertising, kept booking guests, kept promoting herself as the face of the operation. She never realized that every reservation created another record. Every advertisement created another record. Every email created another record. She thought visibility made her stronger. In reality, visibility was creating evidence. The final schedule for the event was released 3 days before opening weekend. Check-in would begin Friday evening at 6 o'clock. Guests would arrive from 5 different states. Local media personalities were expected to attend. Influencers were expected to livestream. Priscilla planned to personally welcome everyone at the front entrance. She wanted a public celebration. What she did not know was that I planned to attend too. And for the first time since this nightmare started, I was not showing up alone. Friday evening arrived colder than expected. A thin layer of fog drifted through the trees while headlights wound up the mountain road one after another. Families stepped out of vehicles carrying backpacks, suitcases, fishing gear, and grocery bags. Children pointed at the giant lodge. Couples took photographs beside the stone entrance. Everything looked exactly the way Priscilla wanted it to look. Successful, professional, legitimate. That was the illusion. I parked across the lot and watched quietly. 2 deputies arrived a few minutes later and parked near the entrance. They were not there to arrest anybody. They were there to keep the peace while a documented ownership dispute was reviewed. That distinction mattered. At 6 o'clock sharp, Priscilla climbed onto the front porch holding a tablet and smiling for several people recording videos on their phones. Decorative lights glowed behind her. Music drifted through open windows. The entire scene looked like a tourism commercial. She loved the attention. "Welcome to Autumn Heritage Weekend," she announced. Several guests applauded. Cameras pointed toward her. Phones started live streaming. Exactly as planned. Just not her plan. The first family approached the check-in table. Priscilla verified names and handed over welcome packets. The second family stepped forward. Then the third. Everything moved smoothly, until one deputy walked up the porch steps and politely cleared his throat. The applause stopped. Priscilla looked irritated more than concerned. "Can I help you, deputy?" she asked. The deputy nodded. "We need to review documentation regarding operational authority for this property." She smiled immediately. Too quickly. Of course. Then she opened a folder she had obviously prepared in advance. She handed over several pages and folded her arms confidently. Guests watched from every direction. Nobody spoke. The deputy reviewed the papers carefully. Then he passed them to the second deputy. They read in silence for nearly a minute. Priscilla kept smiling. Cameras kept recording. The mountain air suddenly felt very still. Finally, the older deputy looked up. "These documents appear to be internal management records." Priscilla blinked. "Correct. Do you have ownership records?" Her smile weakened slightly. "Not much. Just enough." Ownership is not relevant to operational management. The deputy did not respond immediately. Instead, he turned toward me. "Mr. Huxley?" That was my cue. I carried a single binder across the parking lot and walked up the porch steps. Nobody stopped me. Nobody even tried. Guests moved aside as I approached the table. Several recognized me from previous encounters. One couple exchanged nervous looks. Another guest quietly lowered his phone but kept recording. I placed the binder on the table and opened it. Certified deed. Recorded ownership transfer. Parcel records. Title insurance documentation. Tax records. Survey maps. Everything organized. Everything verified. Paperwork has a funny way of making loud people quiet. The deputy compared documents for several minutes. He checked parcel numbers. He checked legal descriptions. He checked recording dates. Then he looked directly at Priscilla. Ma'am, according to county records, Mr. Warren Huxley is the legal owner of this property. Silence. Complete silence. The words seemed to suck all the air out of the porch. One little boy dropped a snack bag. Nobody moved. Priscilla stared at the deputy as if she expected him to change his mind. That is not possible, she said. The deputy calmly tapped the deed. County records indicate otherwise. A woman from Georgia slowly raised her hand. Wait, if he owns the property, then who exactly did we pay? Nobody answered. Another guest spoke up. Are you saying she is not the owner? Then another voice joined in. Then another. The questions started spreading faster than Priscilla could answer them. That was the moment the power shifted. Not because I said anything dramatic. Not because anybody yelled. Because facts had finally entered the room. Priscilla tried to regain control. There is a misunderstanding. The sentence sounded weak even to her. The deputy remained professional. We are not making any criminal determinations tonight. We are simply confirming ownership status. Ownership status. Those two words hit harder than any speech ever could. Guests looked at Priscilla differently now. The confidence that impressed people an hour earlier suddenly looked like something else. Several homeowners from Laurel Crest who had attended the event stood near the back of the crowd. Their expressions told the whole story. They had believed her too. One by one, phones lowered. Conversations stopped. Smiles disappeared. For months, Priscilla had controlled the narrative. For months, people accepted her version of reality. Now the official county records were sitting open on a table for everyone to see. No arguments. No opinions. Just documents. For the first time since this entire nightmare began, Priscilla Vane had nothing left to say. The strange thing about truth is that it does not always arrive with sirens and dramatic speeches. Sometimes it arrives quietly, sitting inside a 3-ring binder on a folding table while everyone suddenly realizes they have been believing the wrong person. The deputies did not arrest anyone that night. They did not need to. Their job was simply to establish the facts, maintain order, and document what they found. Once ownership was confirmed, everything else started moving on its own. Like dominoes. Several guests immediately began asking for copies of receipts and booking confirmations. Others wanted contact information for the rental platforms they used. One family from Tennessee thanked me for staying calm because they had no idea what was happening and were worried they might lose their vacation entirely. I felt bad for them. None of those families had done anything wrong. They were customers. They trusted information that looked legitimate. They were not the problem. The problem was the person who created the illusion. Over the next several weeks, agencies, companies, and attorneys started reviewing records. Payment processors requested documentation. Rental platforms requested documentation. Insurance carriers requested documentation. Everybody suddenly wanted paperwork. That is usually how these situations work. Confidence carries you a long way until somebody asks for proof. Then the game changes. The Homeowners Association Board held an emergency meeting less than 10 days later. Several residents who attended the check-in event demanded answers. Others wanted to know why association resources appeared connected to a private business operation. The conversations were not pleasant. They were necessary. One longtime resident later told me it was the first truly honest meeting the community had experienced in years. That did not surprise me. Honest conversations usually happen after facts become impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, guests who had paid questionable fees began filing complaints and requesting refunds through normal channels. Some received reimbursements. Others pursued chargebacks. Several vendors contacted attorneys regarding unpaid invoices. More records surfaced. More questions followed. Every answer seemed to create 3 new questions. The paper trail kept growing. That mattered. About a month after the event, I finally walked through the lodge alone for the first time since purchasing it. No guests. No management signs. No check-in desk. No promotional banners. Just silence. The kind of silence that old buildings seem to collect over time. Sunlight poured through restored windows. Dust floated through the air. The stone fireplace stood exactly where it had stood for generations. For the first time, the place felt like mine again. Really mine. I spent that afternoon removing old signs, organizing repair schedules, and meeting with contractors. Not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted progress. There is a difference. One builder asked what I planned to do with the property now that everything was settled. I looked out across the mountains before answering. Finish what I started. That was enough. Over the next year, the lodge slowly came back to life. The roof was repaired. The electrical system was upgraded. The hiking trails were cleared. The porch was restored. Piece by piece, room by room, the building became what Elaine always imagined it could be. A place people could enjoy honestly. No shortcuts. No confusion. No fake authority. Just hard work and proper paperwork. Some evenings I still sit on the porch with a cup of coffee and watch the sun disappear behind the mountains. The view never gets old. Neither does the lesson. Because this entire experience taught me something important. Most people think justice comes from being louder than the other person. In my experience, that is rarely true. Justice usually comes from patience, documentation, and refusing to let emotions make decisions that facts should make instead. If somebody claims authority over your property, your business, or your life, do not panic. Do not guess. Do not assume. Learn the rules. Keep records. Verify everything. Paperwork may not be exciting, but it has a remarkable habit of making powerful people suddenly very quiet. And every time I unlock the front door of that old mountain lodge, I remember the note Elaine used to leave inside my lunchbox when life felt complicated. Take your time. Do it right. Turns out that advice works for a lot more than construction projects. It works for justice too.